you're all doing well. Welcome to this session of the International Policy Conference. I'm very pleased to introduce our panel members for this talk. So you probably read a little bit about what this discussion will be about, but the idea of science communication is really important in our society right now. So that's how this fits into the concept of this conference, which is the power of media. And of course, science communication, as many of you know, can be multifaceted. So it's not just about the formal conversations that take place through any media venue, but it's also through what we do as individuals and as citizens to inform others about science. And science informs what we do in every part of our lives. I heard someone say once, if you don't like science, then you should think about the gum that you're chewing, because that's science. And of course, our science goes way beyond. We really serve the community. If you think about atmospheric sciences and related sciences, we really have a strong societal impact component. So I'm going to stop talking here, and for those of you that may not know me, I should introduce myself. I'm Steinbugl. I'm a professor of meteorology. I also direct our Center for Disaster Research and Education here on campus. I'm going to introduce our panel members. So Jeff Jumper is here he's the state meteorologist at the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. And I will let each panel member kind of say a little bit more about themselves once we get started. So we also have Matt Steinbugl. He's from the National Weather Service and State College. He'll tell you a little bit more about himself. Joe Calhoun is from WGAL TV. He's the chief meteorologist. And then Tom Russell is also the chief meteorologist from CBS 21. So let's please welcome our panel, Madam. Kind of logistical. So we'll let each panel member make their comments, and then we will open it up for question and answer if that sounds good. So Jeff, shall we start?
All right. Good morning, everyone. A couple of questions for you before I get started. How many of you guys are science majors? All right. Any communication majors in here? All right. How many of you that are science or communication are taking coursework in both?
You want to call me back and take you to a room to grab a couple more chairs?
Do you have any comms classes at all? Do you think about taking any? I think it's important to think about that, especially if you're younger in your college careers, just because we're finding more often, I think they'll all agree with me, that it's not, you have to have a solid foundation in the science side of it, but more and more we need to be able to communicate that in regular terminology to people, whether you're in the atmospheric sciences, engineering. I have a lot of friends that work in a lot of different fields, and they're finding that a lot of what they have to do is more the communicating, because the computers are doing a lot of the science portion of it. Last question, how many people are here for extra credit? All right. Honest, appreciate it. Okay, cool. Sometimes it's like half the room, so got to know your audience, so I'll talk about that. So just a little bit about me. Dr. Yalda introduced me. I spent 10 years as a broadcast meteorologist. I worked in this market with Tom and Joe, and I did that all throughout different parts of the country here. I worked in Alabama and Louisiana for a little while. It was a really fun job. Hours were tough, but I really enjoyed what I did. I was looking kind of for a backup plan as time went on. And I decided to go back to school to get a master's degree in emergency management, because I had a background in the fire service, as I mentioned up here. And a position opened up at Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency that was a meteorologist position. It was a brand new one created about 3 years ago. So I applied for that, got the job, made the tough switch out of broadcasting into state work, and here I am today about 3 years later doing that. I also work part-time here at Millersville teaching the online Introduction to Emergency Management course. Anyone in my class? All right, no one's getting extra credit. Oh yeah, there we go. All right, cool. Extra credit. All right, so a little bit of what I'm going to do here. I'm not going to talk for long. I'm going to try to get this done in about 8 minutes here or less. A little bit about what I'm doing with my role. I have to provide daily weather forecast briefings for state agency and agency partners. The Weather Service provides it for the county and the local level. I'm providing it for state agencies across the whole Commonwealth, so they can make decisions on whether or not they need to bring more people in, move equipment from different sides of the state, and understand what some of the hazards are that might affect the Commonwealth. Occasionally, I'll get to brief the governor and cabinet level staff on some weather events. These are usually the big scale weather events. He'll come in and we'll have a conversation about some of those hazards, and he may be able to make some additional decisions based off of that. I provide weather support to the comm staff, so I go from talking to senior level officials down to providing information for press releases. And again, I can't talk meteorology terms on that heavy level when I'm working in the communication side of it. So we have to break it down and kind of relate to people. And I play the social media pool directly. Because of the broadcast side, I kind of pulled some of those social media accounts back over to this, and I'll push some information out there as well. And then occasionally I have to provide technical subject matter support to partners. So if you guys remember over the summer, if you're from Pennsylvania or even the Northeast, we had a really wet summer. When we go and try to ask for help from the federal government, we have to provide a case. We have to talk about the impacts. So I've been doing a lot of research recently to get weather information to prove that this was an extraordinary event that happened in the Commonwealth, and we certainly need that money to help support us out. So that's what I've been working on lately. So science and communication. Again, many of you have taken these science classes, digging in, doing the math, really dealing with the background about having to understand the science. But one of the big things that you're going to have to do is communicate to other people. And even if you're talking to your colleagues, yeah, you'll be able to talk in technical jargon, but you have to be able to get out and be able to talk to folks. This woman, a little cartoon up here, a woman, hey, you don't know the time? You could read a piece of what he's saying here, talking the science side about being able to understand what time it is. So, getting to the point, that's what I'm going to try to do here, and that's what I'm going to try to do in 6 minutes at this point. What information does your audience need to know to make an effective decision? For years, the Weather Service, on TV, we would just tell you, hey, it's going to rain. It's going to rain this much. Well, what does that mean? What's that so what factor? Well, 2 to 3 inches of rain when it's been really dry out. If it's coming down over 6, 12 hours, not that big of a deal. If it's been really wet out and 2 to 3 inches comes down in 1 hour, you have flash flooding. So we have to pull that so what factor out as science communicators. Yes, we understand what's going on in the meteorology to cause that rain to happen at that time. But here's what's going to happen. The roads around town will flood. Oh, it's happening around 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. People are going to be driving out of school picking up their kids. That's going to be a problem. Do the buses need to be delayed? That kind of stuff is what we need to be able to continue to look at as communicators of science. So what factor to play? I don't put a lot of stuff out for general public. I try to put just fun information out. I mean, there is the Weather Service and media folks pushing that out, but occasionally I'll throw stuff out there. So on election day this past year, we knew there was going to be some severe storms coming through. A lot of information put on a text graphic there, but I tried to highlight it. What's the bottom line? It's going to storm in the afternoon. These storms are going to be bad. So if you can get out and vote, do it early in the morning, obviously. That's the so what factor in this one. Same thing here. When I have to do these briefings every day, I show them a hydrograph, a graphic of what the river's doing, how fast it's rising, where it's going to crest, and where it's going to fall. Well, that's great. That means nothing to people esoterically near Hershey unless you live near Hershey. So I have to be able to pull out those hazards, and I use the Weather Service to take that line, okay, where's the river at and where is it going? I can put little marks in there so my decision makers have the ability to understand, okay, if that thing's going to 14 feet or is going to crest around 14 feet, what kind of impacts does that have? What does it mean to know your audience? You have to anticipate their needs. That's one of the biggest factors that I can push to you. Understand who you're communicating with. I came here today communicating with the younger audience, trying to throw some memes in there. I'm doing the same thing with the governor, the memes probably wouldn't go over as well. But understand who your audience is, and you have to take it a level further. And that's what I've learned over 10 years of broadcasting and also doing this new position. Anticipate the needs. Know what their next question is going to be. It took me a couple of weeks to understand things that my boss wants to know about every day. So even if it's not in the presentation, when he has a question, I know what he's going to ask. For example, if we're showing hurricane forecast track, he loves the spaghetti models. He loves to see all those models where they're going, and he'll always have questions about that. I don't show it all the time, but I know he's going to ask a question. I anticipate his needs. Again, what is the next effect of what you're trying to communicate to someone? Understand that. And if you don't know the answer, tell them you don't, and you will look for the answer. So it is, what's the end game of the user? What decision are they trying to make based off of the information you're giving? So I'll just leave this up here briefly. 9 tips for communicating science to people who are not scientists. This is from Dr. Marshall Shepard. I know he's been on the Weather Channel and some other things. He's working at the University of Georgia, I think. Know your audience. I mentioned that. Don't use jargon. A lot of times, a defense mechanism, when you're not able to communicate, you start moving back to jargon because it puts you in your comfort zone. You got to try to avoid that at best cases. You want to try to, if you start noticing you're doing that, pull yourself back and try to communicate properly. Get to the point, use analogies, use metaphors, communicate with people. You're talking to a group that's dealing with evacuating animals, use animal. terminology, use animal metaphors with that. 3 key points. Again, people have the ability to absorb certain things. If you can narrow that down into 3 key points, that's helpful, which this is 9. 3 times 3. All right, you are the expert, own that position. Use social media, we know that. Myth of popularizers. Again, that's just the ability of popular topics. There's a myth about that. If you research this article, the link's on there. Hopefully we'll be able to push that. You can read a little bit more about that and relate to people. The worst thing you can do, people won't believe you if when you're talking to them, they don't feel that they can sit down and have a conversation with you. And that the information you have in there, if you can't relate with them, you may as well be talking to a wall at that point. So a couple of key messages, again, 3 points. Out of this graphic, it's going to rain today. They might have some flooding. It's going to snow tonight to Friday. Could have up to 1.5 feet, and then strong damaging winds. Those are the 3 things that are going to happen in that short period of time. We throw it on a graphic, a couple different ways. People read things differently. Some are more graphical, some like to read text. This, again, was a presentation internally. So I went from something going on social media. That was, the one on the right was in my presentation during the day to my management, and the one on the left went out on social media. I took the same information and tried to repurpose it. If we look at this, emphasize your key points. Again, I had 5, but I had a different audience. Trying to go through the different pieces we have to concern. Focus on impacts, not snow totals. Highlighted, red. We were worried with this storm that we were going to have to deal with driving hazards due to blowing snow, not necessarily the amount of snow that's falling. And that's also utilities. Again, that was one of the things we tried to push. Use landmarks. This is the relation. Okay, great. There's an ice jam near the river. Well, that's what it looks like on Google Maps, and that's a picture we found on social media from Bev Pratt. So, okay, wow, yeah, that's impressive. I walked on that trail. Wow, look where the water level is. Same thing with this. More ice jams in Potter County. Never been to that spot. Someone sends a picture in, they tell us where it's at. Near that gas station, we find out where it is on a map. People that live in that area may be able to communicate. Oh, wow, look at how high that is. Add context. We have some weird sciencey stuff going on. You don't have to avoid talking about it. Hey, we had the wettest year to date. We've been keeping records for 124 years. We had the wettest year to date. We didn't have any tropical storms come through during that time period. I mean, that's impressive stuff. Why should I care? And some people may look at this like, I don't care. But the audience that you're kind of going for, people that like this weather nerdy stuff, hey, you throw some stuff in there and talk about why they should care. And give yourself a chance to teach. It's okay to talk the science if you want to teach someone. This is an example of a hail event, and what we did was kind of cut the thunderstorm in half to look at where the hail was. Saying, hey, this is where kind of planes fly. That's where the hail is coming from, and that's why it was allowed to get so big. And other fun stuff. We had the eclipse, taking stuff from the pop culture, or 1980s pop culture, Ghostbusters. Talking about different ways to get people not to stare at the sun during an eclipse. I mean, how many times do you guys hear that? Don't directly at it. And again, this is just to show you that adjusting the delivery methods for the audience. To the left, internal partners, we're looking at threat levels for the next couple of days. Are we just planning for this winter storm today, or is there more stuff coming down the pipe that we need to be worried about? And then to the public, one sheeter, here are some of the things that are going on, and that may be too busy too. We kind of look and see what kind of feedback we get on all that. So this is it. That's what I have for you. The presentation key messages here, 3 of them. Know your audience, but more importantly, anticipate their needs. Know the questions that they're going to ask. It's going to make you feel a little more comfortable. The more you work with an audience, a group like this, probably the only time I'll see you guys, but if you're working with a regular audience, when you do go out in the workforce, understand what they're going to need and be ready and prepared to talk about that, especially when you have complex subjects to talk about. Clear and concise messaging. Keep it short, keep it sweet. Try to keep it under 8 minutes. I think that was pretty close. And that's all I have for my portion.
Testing. Yep.
I guess I can stand up. Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Steinbugl from the National Weather Service and State College. I want to thank Steffi for having me down and giving me the opportunity to talk with you all this morning. I think Jeff did a great job of laying things out as far as the communication aspects of what we do. And it's really interesting. Just a quick story. And I presented with Jeff on Tuesday at another conference, and I told this story about anticipating the audience needs and knowing your audience. So Jeff had mentioned he does the daily weather briefing for the state agencies, the Director Flynn, team director, and many other officials. But when he's not able to, our office in State College, Weather Office, National Weather Service, will fill in as a state liaison office. So this was one of the first briefings that I did, and Director Flynn was on there. The governor he really gets on it. Yeah, big ones. But Director Flynn, the FEMA director, and I go on and I give the briefing, and there was a tropical system out in the Atlantic. I think some of the models had started at, bringing forward the U.S. or maybe even up into Pennsylvania at the end of the period. And so I get through the briefing. I don't even think I may even touched on it because I thought, well, this is really no impact. I'm not going to be worried about this. And I get done. I say, okay, is there any questions? And he pops on and says, so I was looking at the spaghetti models and the GFS or this and that, and I'm like, I did not expect that. So just to kind of bring home that point to maybe know what to expect. The other thing that I was thinking about when Jeff was talking was putting myself back in your shoes. It wasn't all that long ago that I was at school at Penn State, and if I had to do it all over again, and knowing what I know now about the emerging needs of emergency management, decision support activities that are going on at the county level, at the state level. So much of what we do now is the decision support activities. It's not just the forecasting. And not that the science doesn't matter, but when you look at the value of a forecast, it really acquires its value in the influence that it gives to the decision makers. If you provide a forecast to someone who needs to make a decision and they can't take the actionable steps that they need to, whether it's resources, planning, then that forecast may not have very much value to them. So I really think that's where you get the true value of a forecast. So we're learning that from event to event, and really it hits home whenever you can tell that county emergency manager or like someone at FEMA or and even your local municipality, this is not only the forecast, but you can expect X, Y, and Z, as far as the impacts are concerned, and then that actually occurs, and you see that process going through and then making their decisions, and then you can really kind of take a sense of, I don't know, I get a sense of pride, a sense of, I really provided a service there. I just didn't give a forecast. I was, really playing a role in some of that decision making that goes on. But going back to my original point, being at the intersection of emergency management and meteorology, I think really sets you up very well. As far as the career path goes. If I had to do it all over again, I was just telling Dr. Calhoun before we got started that I would definitely be doing something similar. Getting involved in communications, not just meteorology, but being able to communicate the weather information to people who need it most. What else? Some of the things that were going on, in terms of the Weather Service, we are really making a big push as an agency toward evolving toward a decision support model, to where we're not just pushing out the watches and the warnings and the advisories anymore, but it's really more than that. It's taking that to the emergency manager and giving them that higher level service, telling them what the potential impacts are of this snowfall. Not that it's just going to snow 6 inches. What can you expect? Some of the more recent things that have been going on. The Weather Service has been doing a hazard simplification project where we realized, we have way too many printing products. We're confusing the public, confusing our users. So we're trying to slim down the number of products that we have available and make it simple, easier to understand. That's really what the folks who are going to make these decisions, that's really what they need. So we've done a lot of that with winter weather. And this year there's actually a new survey out. I think it's open until the 10th. We're looking to consolidate our winter storm warnings. So maybe do away with blizzard and ice storm and just go with one winter storm warning, and then in the product itself maybe expand upon what we're expecting. So and all of this is really, it's, bringing in social science, bringing in outside, people outside of meteorology, outside the weather service. I think it's really helped us kind of realize, well, this is where we need to be, to set us up into the future going forward, to be able to provide these services to emergency managers and key partners. We've been doing some interesting stuff with, in terms of the winter weather side. PennDOT, the transportation partners. I've been involved in a project in our office called the Integrated Weather Impacts Team, or IWIT. It's very similar to the IWTs that you see at other offices, where we try to get together our core partners, our key stakeholders in transportation, emergency management, a number of different sectors. We try to get them all together and see, what are we doing well, what can we be doing better. And working with the transportation partners this year with PennDOT and Turnpike, we found some interesting ways we can work together on the communication side. One of the interesting things from the communication aspect is how we communicate the winter weather impacts. It's not just enough to say, winter weather is going to be travel, expect hazardous travel. This morning during the morning commute. But what if I can tell you that you're 8 times more likely to be in a crash during the morning commute? We can get those kind of numbers together. It's working with some of the other Department of Transportations and things through the Federal Highway Administration has a very interesting program. But I'll kind of wrap it up here. Bottom line up front, bluff. That's one of the key takeaways. That we have. It's very easy as meteorologists and scientists to hide behind our technical jargon and talk about low pressure systems going here and there and things like that. But at the end of the day, keep the bottom line up front. Limit your jargon, plain language, simple graphics as far as the communication side goes. So, and just lastly, I've been in the weather service now for almost 15 years, and I think it's probably one of the more exciting times ever in my career, because things are really changing, evolving. I really like the direction that we're going, and I think you guys are all set up very well, being right at that intersection of emergency management, communication, and meteorology, to really change the game as you go on in your careers. So I'll turn it over to Joe.
Some of you may know or may not know that, and I'm going to kind of speak from the broadcasting end of this. I teach a course in the spring. It was originally just a survey course just to expose meteorologists to the broadcast industry. We talked about all the different aspects of it, but now it's become more of a, I like to say, a weather communications course, but from the broadcasting end of it. The 4 of us will be together in probably, just at the beginning of December again. And I want to just say that Matt and Jeff do just a fabulous job. I think they get the communication end of it because, with the National Weather Service, with the state government, Tom and I, in the broadcasting end of it, are partners in that whole enterprise. And Matt and Jeff have done a wonderful job. The IWIT events we've both been at, right? And they're excellent. And they're really, for us, I think involving us is good. Is anybody planning to take my course? There you go, we're getting some extra credit. I just want to speak a little bit about from the broadcasting end of it. When Dr. Yalda sent out a reminder a few weeks ago, Jeff right away replied and showed the slides, and I said, why should I do that? I mean, he's got it all there. But one of the things I remember, Dr. Kerr, either of you remember Dr. Kerr from Penn State? I'm a lot older than that. He used to tell us the screaming message. What's the screaming message? I think one of my competitors is doing that too. It does a graphic. What's the screaming message? That's, I think, one of the things we need to do. We need to take it from the science into, like Jeff and Matt have talked about, what the end user, your customer, if you think about it, they're your, Jeff was talking about the end user, but they're your customers. Our customers, for Tom and I, they're our viewers. And I often made the analogy, you can be the best forecaster in the world. You can be accurate all the time. A week and 10 days out, and you're accurate. I like to think I am pretty good at it. I work at that, but if I'm so bored, nobody comes to watch television. Don't understand my story. What good is it? On the other hand, if I'm, Joe likable, but I'm inaccurate all the time, what good is that? From a television standpoint, what do you think our biggest competitor is right now? Who do you think our biggest competitor is? Anybody? I know you.
Social media.
Not quite.
Weather apps.
Exactly. Used to be, I don't know the exact numbers, 10, 15, 20 years ago, 90% of people got their local weather information from television. Now they're getting it from apps. Jeff mentioned, be an expert. Okay? Own that. Don't be a weather app. You can add, as Matt talked about, adding value to the forecast, giving them what they need. They can get that information. They can know it's going to be sunny and 70 tomorrow on their app. But what do they know from you? What do you add to that? I've often made the analogy when I speak to groups. I'm on television because I want to forecast the weather. I didn't go into meteorology so I could be on television. There's a distinction. And I think all of us have had that interest in meteorology, had that interest in the science, and I'm sure that's why you're sitting here. Not because you love taking the physics and the calculus and the differential equations, right? You're interested in that stuff. I know up in the weather lab up there, which when I got here was pretty much a closet, but you guys don't know how lucky you have it right now. When there's a storm coming, you guys are all up there, right? You're camping out half the night. You have that interest. What you have to do is take that interest, that enthusiasm, and you have to start to take that information and communicate and learn how to do that. I had a professor, Dr. Clark will remember, Dr. Craig Bourne, who wrote a book. I highly recommend the book. But I'll tell you, first, I had his radiative transfer and atmospheric optics. It's a really interesting course up in Penn State. Our final was the last final. The last final. And this guy was world renowned. His last question on the final, he got out a can of beer, he put a glass in, and he poured the beer. We had to explain the different optical properties between the head of the beer and the body of the beer. Now, this is killer. You're 20-some years old, 20 years old. It's your last final, and this guy's pouring a beer, right? But what he did, and the way he used that, and read the book, he used something to tell a story, to give you information to, and he wanted you to explain that. Explain that, a can of beer. I often make the analogy, you need to take complex science, meteorology, and you need to tell that story as if you're telling it to your roommate, who might be a psych major, or you think this, your mother, okay? Even better, be your grandmother, right? You have to put that information, like Jeff said, to the brain. What does that mean? What does that mean? Well, maybe your grandmother, she ain't going out. Maybe your mother, she's going to avoid a certain road. You got to give that information in that story to tell them that way. Lastly, I like what Jeff said. Be an expert and own that information and tell a story. I enjoy that. I enjoy telling the science end of it. But I get a minute and a half. I don't have that much time to go into the science. So I've been trying to use social media to do that. I do a Facebook Live a couple times a week. We try to do that, and I love that. I sit down with a cup of coffee in front of my computer, and I talk about the science end of it, and get, as somebody said, get down into the weeds of the science and have fun with it. Bottom line is, yes, competition is our cell phone, but be that expert. You have to be that expert, and you have to be able to tell a good story. Tell it in a story so people will pay attention and be able to use that information. Actually.
To show you how far Joe has come, Joe used his cell phone as his notes. That was pretty amazing. That would not have happened. It's kind of hard to outlast because everybody's talked about most of the things that all of us agree on. So I want to point out a couple of things here. You know, just like you, Joe using the cell phone, still using paper, things are changing so fast. So the stuff that you learned as a freshman about how to use Twitter or how to use Facebook is going to be completely different by the time you're a senior. And I think that's what's really changed our industry, especially television. We see sometimes if we're chasing our tail because, oh, this day we got to do all Twitter. Sarah interned me with me this summer. You know, one day we're doing, oh, you got to hit Twitter. No, you got to hit more Facebook. No, you got to be on Instagram. And that's the challenge you're going to have is how are people accessing that information? And honestly, it's probably changed from when you started school in late August, right? I mean, things are just brand new, they're changing. Matt's done a great job of keeping the National Weather Service in that loop. Matter of fact, I think you taught me a lot about when we first had our conferences. I wasn't using Twitter, I wasn't using Facebook. All those things have come along just in the last couple of years. I jotted down a couple of things that came to mind for me as far as communicating the science. One is avoid generalizations, those broad statements. This will be the worst storm of all time. We run into that so much, and Joe alluded to that because that's really our competition. Somebody with a cell phone and puts out a headline that this is going to be, you know, the worst nor'easter we've ever seen this weekend. Then you got to spend some time walking that back and trying to explain that. So a lot of times we get lumped in together, would you agree, with some folks that maybe we wouldn't want to be lumped in with. So it's important for us to be clear and concise and attribute that information to yourself and say, you know, as Joe's mentioned, you know, be that expert, own that expert. Don't bury the lead. You know, one of the things Sarah and I did this summer was when we talk about the weather, we tell it like a story, just like the journalist. So just like in good journalism, make your point, tell a good story, but a lot of times, you know, we write backwards and we save that nugget, that best piece for last. So don't bury your lead. And that's whether you're doing something on the web, where maybe you only have a couple sentences to do that, or if I'm doing it on TV and I have 2.5 minutes to do that, it's all about telling a good story. So no matter what the platform, stories always win. Keep the science in the scientific statement. So sometimes we avoid language, if we can, we want to avoid language that can turn into political arguments. We know how quickly that happens these days. Years ago, Dr. Yelda and Dr. Clark and I would put on a weather summit, and honestly it got political, and we had to stop doing it after a while because we couldn't even have arguments or scientific discussions. So I encourage you, as you put out science things, you know, sometimes it's easy to tag that with an editorial statement or make a judgment. Keep the science in the scientific statement. I think an important correlation to that is to listen to the other side. You know, as we get into social media, it's a reaction, it's an interaction, and that's what they teach us. So, you know, as far as getting more Facebook likes and tweets, and we want that interaction, but you've got to acknowledge somebody else's point, even if you disagree with it. It doesn't do any good to just shout back over them. So if you're making a point on Twitter, or you're making a point on Facebook, you know, that really makes sense. I see what you're saying there, but have you looked at it this way? And so much of our civil discourse is getting lost. That's trickled down, I think, from the political side into the scientific side. So as you're making scientific points, be courteous. Acknowledge some different viewpoint and look at it from both sides. As I mentioned here, this is getting harder and harder to do. Would you agree with that? Watch for misleading headlines. So Joe and I we are a slave to this because we'll write a story for the web, or we'll do something, or in our case we call it a tease in television, where, you know, here's the story, we got this storm coming this weekend, and all of a sudden, we didn't write it, but the promo for the 5 o'clock news is 6 inches of snow is coming. You're like, wait a minute, that's not what I said. So some of those things are actually out of our hands, but it's important to watch for those, and in our business is to check with the promotion department and make sure they didn't write a misleading headline. as Jeff mentioned, audience is so important. Know your audience, relate to that audience, whether it's on television, whether it's on the web, whether it's on Twitter, and all of those are different. And it's very challenging these days to know who is your audience. So try to dig into that a little bit and relate to that. One of the challenges we have is the newsroom might ask us to explain El Nino in 3 or 4 sentences. And all they want, they just want something out there. So much of our business now is just content, just get it out there. And from the science standpoint, we want it to be right. We want it to be factual. We want people to be able to understand it. And sometimes it feels like it's an impossible task. You know, how can we do these big concepts? And I think where Joe was saying maybe using Facebook or these longer form platforms might be the better way to go. One of the things we talk about a lot in our conferences as we go to, in particular the broadcast weather conferences, the social sciences are now a big part of what we do. And by that I mean, okay, so we have a warning, we have a storm coming, how do we get people to act? So how do you take that information that's so important, that's going to affect people's lives, but turn it into action? Are they prepared? Did they get their car out of harm's way? Did they evacuate, as we saw in Mexico Beach in Florida? So turning that scientific information into action is a real challenge moving forward, and the social sciences have become a big part of that. How do you make people really react and turn that into action? The other thing I wanted to mention was just the impact forecast, and I think all 3 of these guys have mentioned it. It's one thing to say, hey, it's going to rain, it's going to be windy this weekend, but what's the impact? Is it going to change your game? Penn State has a game, so you got all these tailgaters going into a sloppy field. They're going to get stuck in the mud. Is it going to be windy? Is it going to be cold? So how does your scientific information impact people? So I don't want to speak too long so you guys can ask questions, but thank you so much for having me here today, and we look forward to opening up the discussion.
Thank you so much for your insightful comments. So I'm going to open up for questions. Are there any questions?
So what would you guys recommend as the best way to communicate like watches and warnings and like the severity of certain storms? Because I know plenty of my family members just kind of like they get a flash flood warning, they just blow it off because they get 6 of them a summer. So like what would you guys recommend as the best way to communicate the severity of some weather to just community members?
From the public standpoint, I'll take the broadcasting end of it. I think we have a very good system in this country. You know, on your mark, get set, go. The outlooks, you know, the SPC outlooks in the day before, and then you have the watches, and then you have the warnings. It goes from, you know, a large area to a defined area to county or even sub-county areas. I think that's a great area, but I think what you're getting at, how do you get, and Tom just mentioned, people to react to that? That's part of your job as a communicator and as a broadcaster. It's become more difficult because they see it on an app, and they see the warning. Okay, what's that mean? Warning, severe thunderstorm warning is in effect until, but they're only seeing part of it. The National Weather Service actually puts out a lot of good information. You know, road mile markers on roads, towns, and when it's going to affect them. Tom mentioned it too about, you know, telling that story about not burying the lead. Obviously, I think you got to go into a little bit of journalism. Who, what, when, where? You know, what is it? Who is it going to affect? When is it going to affect somebody, and where? And you get that and you hammer it out there. There's become, I think sometimes we take it a little far, but you tell them the story, you tell them again, and you keep telling them. Sometimes I think we go on for days telling them to tell them, but so I think that's the best information in terms of warnings.
Let's say just context and visualization. You know, for example, as you mentioned, the severe outlooks. Let's say for a severe weather event, if we're outlooked to have a moderate risk day, knowing the climatology of that. So understanding that, you know what, we get one moderate risk day here every 5 years, so maybe we should pay closer attention to this. You know, my boss always jokes when we show the threat maps for tornado, wind, and hail. Oh, a 2% chance for a tornado. Well, that's designed for the scientists. For us, 2% is a big deal. For Alabama, still a big deal, but different types of tornadoes. You know, you look at that on the context side, and then, you know, for the public side, visualization. You know, maybe that's when you push out the short video clips of 6 inches of water or washes a car away, that kind of stuff, to kind of show them, or take those clips of other events and say, understand this. But I will tell you too, just something not to beat yourself up about. We hear a lot of stories, especially working in emergency management. I know that there was a rescue crew out doing a water rescue. Someone that drove through a flooded roadway, the road wasn't there, pulled the woman and her child out of the car, and her first response was, if I had my Jeep, I would have made it through. So there's also that kind of risk aversion. We beat ourselves up pretty heavily on making sure that message gets out.
Right.
But we also have to understand that some of that stuff is out of our control. We still have to get better at it, though, and find better ways to communicate with people, especially now that we have to go to them for information instead of them coming to us, which used to be the way.
To add on to that real quick, the frustrating thing for us is, the flash flood will come out, and then your friend will go and drive or get stuck and think, well, we didn't know it was going to be this bad. And we're like, you had a warning, you had ample information to know that. So it comes back to, hopefully that person's going to go to a secondary source, whether it be Jess or the county website or Joe or I, whatever, and say, okay, what does that flood warning actually mean? But it's so frustrating from our standpoint, as Joe mentioned. You might spend, now with television stations, we like to do like a whole day and a half lead time. Hey, tomorrow's an alert day. Tomorrow we're going to be experiencing this. And then people still don't heed that warning. So there is a level of frustration from our end, but those are some of the things that this next generation can work on.
And I think from the Weather Service perspective too, when we talk about bringing in the social science aspect, we can issue warnings, and we know that people aren't going to take those actions. It's okay. So why didn't they take action? What can we do to change that behavior? And I think that's what we can work on. To bring in addition to the warning that can kind of urge people to change their behavior, not drive through the flooded road whenever we're issuing the warning, because we know that people are going to do that. The things that not to go outside when there's a tornado warning effect for your area. So I think it's it's education, it's outreach. We do a pretty good job leading up to events most of the time. To be prepared, watches, and getting out in front of these situations. But I think there's some areas that we can improve on there. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how we can maybe build some of that maybe into the warnings, maybe more impactful statements, maybe some of that social science into the warnings. Maybe that's something that we'll see coming in the years to come to help people realize that I am in some sort of danger and I shouldn't just go about my business.
I'd like to add on to that too. My in-laws were living with us, they were elderly, and there was a tornado warning for Lancaster County. And when I got home, I said, no, we didn't think we had to go to the basement. We didn't think it would affect us. These are people, my in-laws, who lived with me and wouldn't listen to me on television. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But on the other hand, though, too, you can't, like Jeff said, you can't beat yourself up over it. I mean, there's only so much that you can do. You can't overhype it, too. I think one of the things I'll say a lot of times during a warning, there's a tornado warning, you should go to your basement. And I'll say, off the cuff, it's only going to be a half hour. Go spend some time with your wife in the basement. Go to the basement and just spend that time. Okay, it's only a half hour. Why risk it? If you can tell them that risk assessment, as Jeff was saying, why risk it? Go to the basement. Just take a half hour and have a conversation with your wife. You probably haven't talked to her in a month.
So I'll ask a question. So something that's inherent in science is uncertainty. So can you comment on how you incorporate that into this communication of science information? Because a lot of times people are looking for exact information. So how do you deal with that?
You want to jump in first? That's been a big change for me. I've been in weather over 20 years, and I think in my experience, our bosses want us to explain uncertainty. And maybe, Matt, you can elaborate on this a little bit. You know, there's probabilistic forecasting and deterministic forecasting. So from Joe and I's standpoint, we kind of want to translate, okay, what is a 20% chance of rain or a 50% chance of rain to the average person. But as we've seen with hurricanes and as our science gets better, it's more important to also communicate the uncertainty of it so that people can make decisions and it gets down to Jeff's level. So I think that's been a big change just in the time that I've been doing it, from, hey, it's going to rain tomorrow, you know, take your umbrella, to, hey, there's a 50% chance that not only is it going to rain, but there could be dangerous winds with this. So to answer your question, for me, it's actually being able to be open with that uncertainty. And uncertainty is not necessarily a bad thing, but it may help tell the story in a broader sense.
I think sometimes you can also, too, give best case, worst case scenario. I think that sometimes is what people can then say, okay, you know, they can grasp the extremes of an event. Forecasting. If this, then, you know, we could miss this, or if this, we could get more. And again, it's telling a story, it's telling the communication. But I agree, I think, you know, the deterministic forecast is what we all did. I've been blocked on 35, 37 years of this. But I think in the last 15, 20 years, we've gotten more understanding. We're looking at ensemble products, right? We're looking at those products, and we see the uncertainties. You just have to be able to communicate those uncertainties, and the way to do that, I think, is through a story. Keep going back to that. That's quite helpful.
To Tom's point about conveying the uncertainty, you know, in a lot of ways, you have to, as a forecaster, you can't shy away from it. I know, you know, anecdotally from being in the weather service, you know, maybe, you know, going back some years, you know, we've always been more conservative. You know, there's a potential storm out on day 5, day 6, and you kind of won't hear anything from us, you know, one way or another. But now, what we try to do more is get into the conversation, embrace the uncertainty, tell people what you know, not what you don't know. You know, and that can be a source of information. To Joe's point about the probabilistic side, you know, everything's kind of going in that direction. You know, we've come up with some new products and services that kind of show your most likely outcome, but also sort of like the worst case, the best case, because we know that you know, that's the kind of thing that decision makers want to know. Exceeds probabilities for certain thresholds. Decision makers have, you know, different levels where they need to make decisions on, and you can convey that to them in a probabilistic sense, you know, to where you know, they can base decisions off of. We hear more and more now where we may not have heard this in the past, is that, well, how confident are you in having this outcome? I heard that a lot with the transportation folks, you know, and we're looking at how to best convey that. I think that we can improve upon that. What's the best way to express confidence? Is it do I just tell you that I'm moderately confident? I have low confidence? And you also have to consider the different types of confidence. So I may be confident there's going to be a storm, but I might not be confident in how much snow. I might not be confident in when it's going to start or end. You know, these are the kind of things you have to consider. But I think in general, getting into the conversation, embracing the uncertainty, telling people what you know, because you know there's a lot of things that are going to come out. You know, there's a big storm advertised by one of the models on day 7. You're going to start seeing things pop up on social media. You have to be that voice of reason, you know, and understand that there is a potential for a storm out there, but let's not get too hyped up about it just yet.
Just to echo that, you know, as Matt mentioned, that bluff, the bottom line up front, your conversations almost work the same way. You're going to give them those key points. It's going to snow, the winds are going to be bad, and it's going to happen during rush hour. That's the stuff they need to know. Some people can run with that, make decisions because they have certain thresholds they have to make choices on. But then as you're allowed to get into more of a conversation, which sometimes you don't get to on television, you get it on Facebook or people write it out, you can have those conversations, and that's where you can express some of that confidence. Raise your hand on the panel of how many times you've either heard, all right, what's the real forecast? Or what's your gut feeling? So there's an appetite for that probability, but there's also that point where people are making black and white decisions. we live in a very gray world. So we have to narrow that shade of gray down to either the black or the white side for them to make the decisions. And I'll give you an example of the summer storms. We had multiple storms, different types, from rapid flash flooding activity to a week of just heavy rainfall. And we had to help make decisions hours out, days out, on whether or not we were going to move the helicopter water rescue teams. Where do we want to position them? Okay, we know where it's going to rain, we want to position them here. Well, that might be an issue. They might not be able to lift off because it's going to be foggy there. So being able to get that decision made 2 days out on a forecast where you're looking at where the heaviest rain is going to fall is a challenge. And understanding that, conveying that, hey, this is what we're looking at now. This is our best forecast as of today. If you have time to delay this, another 6 hours, another 12 hours, put people on, give them a heads up on standby, and then we pull the trigger at a certain time and we do the best forecast at that point. Letting them understand that, you'll get a little more respect back too. And then on the other side of the coin, my boss wants me to start teaching caveat courses for other staff members because we have uncertainty when we have those conversations.
I, for years, have given one pat forecast. Usually, first couple weeks after Christmas holiday, and toward the end of February, I'll get, used to be letters or phone calls, now emails, or so we'll tweet at me. A mother of a going to be bride, and she'll ask, we're planning an outdoor wedding the middle of June. What's the weather going to be like? They want me to make their decision. Should they do an indoor or outdoor wedding already? You just give them climatology and say, hey, it's going to be sunny and 70, have a good time. I mean, you can't give them any of it at that point. But that's what people want. They want you to make their decision. What you have to give them is information, the impacts. Obviously, you can't do a 6-month forecast for a Saturday in June or a Friday in October, but that's kind of demands you get. And Matt mentioned, you're going to get, we're seeing more and more pressure now, and I get it from the newsroom now, to actually say what I know. And that's because on social media, you have, not even on social media, you have websites who are showing model data that's 8, 10, 12 days out, showing a potential blizzard over central Pennsylvania. Well, guess what? Our biggest competition is that phone, and those people are getting that information. So you have to be able to address it and say, here's what we know so far. We know there's a potential for a storm. And I say potential because a lot of things still have to come together. The players are on the field, that doesn't mean you have a team. The ingredients are in the pot, but you might not have it cooked yet. So you got to explain to that people what you know and what you don't.
What Joe's touching on here is something called trust, and I think it's getting lost in this day and age of social media. So, if you watch Joe for, what you say, 50 years today, you build a level of trust because Joe's not always right, but he's right most of the time. You build that level of trust. So hopefully when you see that, this weekend is a perfect example. 7 days, 8 days ago, people were saying it's going to snow, here in Millersville. And I got texts, I'm sure you did, or tweets, whatever, saying, oh, how much snow are we going to get? So you have to temper those, and hopefully there's a level of trust that you build because you have been doing all this we talked about. You've communicated the science, you've been fair over the years, and you build that level of trust. I think the challenge going forward is who's going to take the time to build that level of trust. And I think that's going to be really hard for your generation as you communicate sciences. We always have the saying in weather that you're only as good as your last forecast. You blew that last snowfall. But there has to be some built up of trust, and I think the National Weather Service has that inherently. I think FEMA, the folks that Jeff works with. But I think those sources are going to be harder to find because one guy on the internet's going to get a forecast right, and then you're going to, oh, he's my guy. So that's challenging going forward. I'm looking for that trust, that source of trust.
So this question's kind of directed to the broadcasting side, but I know sometimes you have bosses that kind of want you to present or communicate the weather in a certain way, but you kind of want to go in another direction. So how do you kind of combat?
I go my way.
Okay.
you know, I'm not trying to be arrogant about it. I think you guys over here probably know I'm a pretty humble guy. I'm pretty down to earth. But when my boss starts telling me, well, I want you to say this, I'll put it in retirement papers. Yeah, there is. I think there's more pressures, Thomas, which you get, and I'm sure you get this. You know, I get a call at 2 o'clock. Can you talk about this week? You know, and it's Friday. Can you talk about next weekend's storm? You know, when you're still 8-10 days out. What do you want me to talk about? Can you show it? Well, yeah, I can show it. What do you want me to show? You want me to show the model that gives us snow? You want me to show the model that gives us rain? You want me to show the model that gives us nothing? Well, you know what I've done? I've actually shown all three. Just to show the uncertainty. And I think Dr. Yoltz's question is probably one of the biggest challenges we have in this business of weather or any kind of science communications is the uncertainty. It's a science. I mean, it's not an exact science.
It takes a little bit. When you're getting a paycheck from someone, I mean, it really does. It's tough. It's tough because you want to stand your ground and you also want to understand what they're trying to do. 2 points. Like, I mean, my current job, I've got a question, and you have these side conversations, and it's like, you hired me to make these forecasts. You hired me as an expert in my field, all of us, to help you make these decisions. Not to make them for you, but to help make you. So we've been on phone calls where we're closing state office buildings and you're getting weird questions. That comes with a dollar amount. You close a state office building, people don't work that day. You're still paying your taxes to pay those people to sit at home and do nothing. It's a challenge. Even in the broadcasting side, when I worked there, I'll give you one story, I won't tell you where it was, but we were up against a Facebook media group that was putting out a forecast. They nailed the forecast. We didn't. They wanted to have them in, come talk, sit at the desk, and have them talk as to why they got the forecast right. When I dug deep enough, as I said, you can have them do that, but I won't be here for it. Have someone else do it. I said, that's up to you. And I said, I probably won't be working here much longer after my contract. I got down to the nitty-gritty of it, and they found out, well, we want more Facebook likes on our page. So they have like 200,000. So if we get some of theirs over to our page, and at that point I was like, you don't make any money off of this. So having those conversations, understanding, again, your audience, your management team, it's tough when you're young getting into it because you don't want to make a bad name for yourself, but don't be afraid when it's time to stand up for yourself and stand up for what you do. They hired you as the expert. Do it in a politically savvy way, but again, don't be afraid to make some of those decisions and have some of those conversations. That's why you're there.
So kind of going off of Dr. Yellow's question, a common phrase with meteorologists is that we're literally paid to be wrong. So
It's great.
So how do you communicate afterwards and kind of backtrack when your forecast wasn't exactly what happened, like to the public?
Checks the same every other week.
I think
Kind of let it roll off your back.
Yeah, it's a humbling business, that's for sure. And I think you've got to own up to that. And I think it comes back to the trust factor. If we go on the air and say, look, you know, we missed this by, you know, we didn't see this aspect, or we didn't account for this. I think you got to own up to it. People appreciate that. And honestly, from our standpoint, learn from it. So that the next time you see that. You know, when I first moved to central Pennsylvania in 2002, we were in a drought, and I would see all these storms marching from Pittsburgh eastward. Well, I had moved from Florida, and anytime you get a thunderstorm in Florida, you get, you know, a half inch, 3/4 inch of rain. So I'm like, oh, it's going to rain this afternoon, and then it would hit the mountains and not happen. So it was very humbling for me to learn the topography of the area, the idiosyncrasy of that, and I had gone up to that. So that it's part of it is being honest and trying to build that trust that I mentioned before.
Honesty and trust, I think, are the two big words that Tom just mentioned. This is a long, old story on who's a Philadelphia Phillies fan. Remember Mike Schmidt, greatest third baseman ever to play the game.
Brooks Robinson.
Wow. Well, Mike Schmidt, real short story, did an interview in Montreal when they were playing the Expos, and he kind of slammed the Philadelphia fans. And when he came back, he knew he made a mistake, and he knew he was going to get it when he came running out in the field. He put a wig and a mask on and ran out to play third base. He just made light of it. And you know what? I'm human. May it go, but I'm sorry. I made a mistake. You can't be. I'm not saying you go on the air and say you're sorry. I mean, you're giving your best information. If I'm an old news director who used to say, we're not in the business of editorializing, I said, I am. You're getting my opinion. You know, you're not getting, I'm not telling you, I'm telling you who, what, when, where, but it's my opinion of who, what, when, and where. Okay? I'm constructing that story journalistically, but it's my opinion. It's not, I'm not telling, you know, in the newsroom will say, oh, you missed that one. Well, you know what? I'm missing a story that's in the future. You missed a story that was in the past, which is worse. So, you know, quite frankly, you have to have some really thick skin. Some of us, a friend of mine who's in Raleigh-Durham and he's been in this business even longer than me, Greg Fischel. Greg at one point called me up, and he and I are really good friends from our Penn State days, and he said, I was thinking of getting out of the business. And because he just couldn't stand the public. They don't understand what we do. I said, tell them. I explain to them. You know, it's not easy. It's not a simple thing.
It's okay. There's days it's going to get to you. You know, you learn ways to deal with it. And realize that overall, you're providing a service to people. You know, that without what we do and the computers that were developed by our colleagues to do these jobs, people would be in a lot worse shape. And you know, we're putting together the best that we can for an area, and also, you know, for us, you're covering 10 counties, you're covering 33, you're covering 67. You're not going to get everything right. You know, we draw these fancy maps that are 2D, like we're cutting out construction paper as to where the snow's going to fall. But we live, you know, in a state that has a lot of mountains where it's going to be different. So you're not always going to get everything perfect. Understanding what your scope is. You know, for me, the scope is the generality. It's going to hit the western part of the state harder than the eastern. We're able to move resources. You know, for them, it's, you know, communicating to the public on a weekend if their plans are going to be changed to go up to a football game, or because it's, you know, a holiday coming up, do I leave a day earlier because the snowstorm's going to come on Christmas Eve or something like that.
That's my biggest forecast this weekend is my wife wants to know because we're going to Penn State. And that's my biggest, you know, I gotta live with her. Yeah. Serious.
Talk about trust.
There's some pressure. But yeah, I mean, I've got to help her make a decision. When you know, are we going to tailgate, or are we going to not go to tailgate, or you know, am I wearing a coat, or am I wearing reindeer? That's my biggest forecast this week.
We have time for one more question. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I have sort of a question. What I'm hearing a theme around integrity and social responsibility, being good people in our fields, and the weather, like everything else, seems to have a growing disparity effects on people who are most poor, who can't rebuild, who can't evacuate in times of floods because of their economic or social conditions. And I'm wondering what you think about your field's responsibility to talk about or take action around those issues, especially on the emergency management side.
I'll start with that. What's your background?
Social work.
Social work? Okay, cool. I'll just talk a little bit about what I've learned in about 3-4 years doing the emergency management side. It's tough on our end with some of that. Obviously, a lot of what we have to deal with are the more vulnerable populations, whether it's the advanced age, socioeconomic status. It's kind of a big deal. And we have groups, at least within TEMA, that work on mitigation projects. You know, I think the number's up now. For every dollar you spend, saves $6. So every mitigation dollar you spend saves $6 in the future. It used to be 1 to 4. But you're selling insurance policy to people. So when you're looking at some of these weather hazards, changing climate, different types of you know, storms that are more intense than they've ever been, you know, we're looking at that kind of information, and we're finding areas that are most vulnerable. Well, we built a society near rivers and streams because we needed that. to live. And a lot of those places are where people have lived in the same houses for generations. I think the big challenge for us is getting the buy-in, getting people to believe that there is science out there showing changes, whether you believe in climate change or the impacts of what's happening. Things are changing. We live in a changing world, period. Talking to those folks and having them understand that those risks can be mitigated. We can find ways to help you get out. If you notify us that you need help, we tell you to evacuate, you're going to need a bus to get out. We learned that in Katrina. Yeah, you tell people to evacuate, great. They have no way to get out or nowhere to stay because they don't have the money for it. They can't do it. The pet part has come up. I'm not leaving because I'm not leaving my pet here. Well, more pet-friendly shelters, that kind of stuff. But we're finding a lot of times when we get this mitigation money after disasters that we have these plans, we'll buy out your house, we'll move your house on your property out of the floodplain. A lot of times people don't want those solutions. They want that comfort that you're going to take care of me here, where I am. So we have to find a way to kind of balance that and try to let folks understand that risk management. It's one thing for someone to go out and build a beautiful beach house on the beach and have it get knocked down just for them to be able to rebuild it, versus someone living by a creek that now all of a sudden upstream, Ellicott City, we just paved everything and it's changed the drainage system. So now all of a sudden you're getting flooded and getting pushed out and you can't afford to buy a new home. So to kind of bring that back in, it's a challenge. I think we do have a piece in that. I think our piece is communicating that risk. Things are changing. Yes, over this past summer, people have never flooded here before. I don't live in a floodplain. Now my house is blown out and there's no money for me? Yeah. And that hurts us to say that as emergency managers because we just haven't communicated that information to them. I personally just bought flood insurance for my own house. Seeing all that stuff happening. I'm not in a floodplain. My house should not flood. But if it does, I don't want, well, one, I don't want to be like, you're a meteorologist. So that was part of it. But two, just watching the devastation, understanding the things that are covered. I'm out of the floodplain and it only costs about $30 a month compared to $60 for car insurance. I mean, you use your car every day, your house every day, you cover for fires and other things. So trying to get that risk communication out there, I think is really where we have to push it, and then finding ways to help those people, finding different programs out there to help those people. If they accept the risk, understand it, and want to be out of it, let's get them out of it.
There was a real world example of, coming on the time, 2 or 3 summers ago, the Allison Hill section of Harrisburg was one of the poorer sections that Market Street just totally flooded. And they found out the drainage didn't work. The drainage was blocked, probably for years. But because, they're not the squeaky wheel, they don't get the attention from the city of Harrisburg. So that is a simple city municipality thing that should have been addressed at some point, but because it's a poorer section, it wasn't. So I think that's where your field is so important, your social work. These folks who are, not so well off, they're not thinking about drainage or the next storm or whatever. But that really needs to be addressed because that's something that shouldn't have happened. That's it.
You can see why it does.
Right.
Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I think it also brings up the value of interdisciplinary work, and
Yes.
and maybe we don't think about social workers working with the weather forecasters and disaster management, but there's a bit for that, right?
And I think all 4 of us have seen this. I usually go to the American Meteorological Society broadcast conference every year, and we almost every year now. I know, and again next year it's with the morning conference, and there's a lot of, so we have talks from social scientists all the time. What do you think, though? I mean, what do you think we need to do?
I think that we need to understand together the many forces, like why does somebody want to stay in their
Right.
neighborhood where all their social connections and
Right,
supports
sure.
are in the times of disaster, and how do we balance the multiple needs that people
It's a
have?
difficult thing. It's a difficult thing for us as communicators to tell them, you gotta leave. And they, again, I go back to, I had family and friends down in Naples last year. My niece left, but I had friends down there. They called me after, when was it? Last year. Yeah, last summer. Irma. And they called me afterwards and said, oh my God, we'll never do that again. I said, well, I told you. But yeah, back to the social end of it, yeah, it's difficult.
And you all have a great pulpit for maybe addressing, helping bring the news towards some of these kind of economic forces that impact how people do.
We did that, true. We did that a lot. When I worked in broadcasting in Alabama, we did that a lot. We had a couple of like bullet points of things to talk about, especially due to the amount of mobile homes that were everywhere. And we would talk about that when we got to the watch phase, and we really encouraged when we went out and did talks that if you live in some of these more susceptible properties, these mobile homes, find one of your friends that has a site-built home or access to a storm shelter. If a watch is issued, go there. Even if they're not home, like come up with a plan and work. And we started to see a little bit of work there because you get enough tornadoes going through, people start paying attention. But that was just one hazard we were able to attack at a small level, knowing that the folks that are most vulnerable are the ones with mobile homes in those cases. So trying to understand your community a little better, and that's again where the social side comes in for us to understand those little limits.
Yeah, one second.
Okay, well,
I'm
that's
wondering,
please.
within the profession, is there a push to remove the entertainment aspect out of the report? Because, I mean, knowing that weather has such a significant impact.
Have you seen the Weather Channel?
The weather app.
Well, and that's why I ask, is there a push to change it? Because it's hard to say, well, why do people not take it seriously? When in a lot of markets, the way it's delivered absolutely varies the seriousness of the forecast.
Well, and again, I'll go back to what I said. I think the best way to deliver a message is a good story. Go back to the Bible, parables in the Bible. People didn't understand, but when they heard a parable, oh, that makes some sense. You tell a story, you try to get people to understand that message. If it's, if you want to call it, I don't think anybody in this television market goes to that extreme of infotainment. I think we all keep it pretty straight, but you've got to tell an interesting story. I'll personally, no, I've never had that. Be more entertaining, be more funny. Tell one, no, never.
The only thing I would say is, if you've seen the Weather Channel, you can say, oh, they're going for entertainment value. But when you see a graphic, I don't know if you've seen the immersion graphics, where it looks like you see what 7 feet of water looks like next to a 6-foot person. That's actually a pretty good storytelling technique. So I guess you'd have to define what you consider entertainment versus scientific. So as Joe mentioned, if that gets the point across, maybe it's effective.
And I think too, there's a line to draw. I think it's the responsibility of us to do that. When I moved here from Alabama to Fox, I was told you have to be funny. I said, this is in my interview. And I said, I can do that. I can have fun. I said, but I'm not going to do it while standing on the camera. And there's got to be in front of the green screen. So when I'm doing weather, it's weather. I said beforehand, if we do segments and stuff, I said to a point, you can't, because then you're working on that side of your credibility as a broadcaster. But there's got to be points where people take that part seriously and understand that when it's weather time, we have to be able to tell an effective story in a way that people are going to understand it.
Well, thank you so much. Let's say thank you. Thank you so much. I think it was excellent. Just kind of opened our eyes to all of the issues, and hopefully you took down a lot of notes in terms of best practices and what to do, what not to do. It's also a wonderful networking opportunity. These professionals lend their time to come here and be gracious about sharing all their expertise with you. So please take advantage of this. I would write down their names, and you can hopefully reach out to them if you need help. And have a wonderful day. If you have an opportunity to attend some of the other sessions of the conference, I encourage you to do so. And we'll see you also next week.